Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome today to the Innova.buzz podcast from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm guessing that you're both in Atlanta, Georgia, the co founders of Lead It Like Lasso, Marnie Stockman and Nick Coniglio. Welcome to the Innova.buzz podcast, Marnie and Nick. It's a great privilege to have you
Thanks for
both as
having
my
us.
guests.
Thanks for having us.
Now, Marnie, I know you started life as a maths high school teacher, or you started
Yeah, I
your
didn't
career
pop
as a
right
maths
out
high
teaching
school
high school
teacher.
math.
Yeah, yeah. And transitioned to a successful entrepreneur. And now, Nick, you've joined with Marnie to author the award-winning book Lead It Like Lasso, which draws inspiration from the TV character Ted Lasso to explore unique leadership principles in a kind of different way than perhaps your traditional business books talk about leadership. Now, and you've also got a masterclass in the podcast that help individuals become best versions of themselves and talk about leadership at all levels. So tell us a little bit about the impact you aim to make in the world today with all of the work you're doing.
Well, I think it starts with kind of our rule number one in the book, which is leadership is life, and that we believe everyone is a leader. And so a lot of folks don't get that. They think of leadership as something like that their boss is, and they don't necessarily think of needing to
Mm.
know themselves in order to lead themselves. So I think in the land of impact, we hope to really connect with folks and help them understand themselves so that they can lead themselves to become the best version of themselves. So that's our take on rule number one. We have 10 others. I don't know which one Nick wants to talk about, but that's my take on that one.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that, I think, in terms of impact, I think Marnie and I are both problem solvers. That's one of our core values. And if anybody who listens to us or reads our book, takes our masterclass, understands how important core values are to us, it's the beginning of everything. Um, and from a problem solving perspective, I think one thing that we've always been curious about and fascinated by is we've been in so many different environments, whether it's in education, in corporate, America, international business, what have you. And we've always noticed that some people just thrive and some people struggle. And, we not only are we curious about why that's the case, but we wanted to try to find a way to help those that struggle, right, begin to thrive. And over time, I think we were convinced that those who truly are successful aren't focused on external success. They're the ones who are focused on personal leadership, like, traits like integrity, authenticity, and continuous learning and curiosity. Um, so we're trying to solve that challenge, right? For those that are stuck, that are struggling a little bit, give them a cheat sheet, so to speak, on how to kind of move the ball forward and progress a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm fascinated by this idea of leadership is life and starting off with the principle of self leadership, because I think going back into my corporate days and this is in the 80s and 90s when people started to talk about we're no longer managers, we have to be leaders. And there were bad managers
There
around,
still are.
but
Yeah.
people understood the concept of yeah, but people understood the concept of management much better. It was, "Okay, I'm the boss. I tell you what to do,
Yeah.
you do it."
Yeah.
That's management, right? And I'll check in with you regularly and make sure you're doing it and, so on. Now, leadership is quite different, of course, and then when we started learning about leadership, we realized that there are a lot of bad managers around, but people that were then placed in leadership position, there were a lot more of them that were bad at leadership than there were previously people bad at management. And I sort of reflect back on that time and think, well, often it was because they were so internally focused. They were struggling with their own whatever internal demons they had. And it reminds me a little bit of, so I do a lot of mentoring for people doing speaking. And one of the messages I keep telling people is when you get up on stage, forget about yourself. You're there to serve the audience, you're there to deliver value to the audience. And when you make that transition, and I know when I made that transition, all of a sudden things just improved out of sight. And in some ways, I think that's that's what that reminds me of. So I don't know whether you want to comment on that or whether
Well,
you want to
I'll say
elaborate on
that,
that.
I went from being a high school math teacher to the CEO of the company that Nick and I were two of the co-founders of. And I would often have folks, as I went to speak, look up and think, and I would tell them I started out as a high school math teacher. So you may be wondering why you should listen to me. And I would say, but that's because I sold
Mm,
pre-calculus to 16-year-olds. So I know something about sales. And then my answer to that what I know about sales is that it's not about you. It's how do you deliver your message to make it about them, right? So 16-year-olds don't really care about
mm,
pre-calculus. So if you're good at your job, you have to make them care about it. And in business, you need to make the folks that work for you and those that you work for know that it's about them. So both your clients and the folks working for you. So I would agree completely. Take yourself out of it in a way to give to others.
mm,
But I would also add that you gotta know yourself, right? I think,
mm,
Jurgen, when you were describing the '80s and '90s, that was my world. I guess it was a little later in the early 2000s. I was one of those accidental leaders, right? I was really good. I was in data consulting, business intelligence consulting, and I was really good at managing projects and managing clients. So the logical next progression for me was I was promoted to overseeing the entire consulting organization. Um, and I was never really taught how to do that, right? I believed it was okay. I need to tell people what to do,
mm,
and that was wrong. Eventually, my CEO at the time mentored me, right, and got me on the right track. But there is a difference, right? Traditional leadership, which is a lot like management, is all about command and control. It's about speaking. It's about outcomes. Whereas leadership, as we know it today, is all about listening, right? It's about helping others grow and ensuring that you're you're not basing everything that you do based on outcomes, but measuring success based off of the growth and development of your teams. I think a lot of people refer to today as servant leadership, and that's such an important difference between where it was 25, 30 years
mm,
ago as opposed to where it is today. But bringing it back to the personal leadership, it's really hard to lead others unless you kind of lead yourself first. Because if you don't, you're not being authentic with yourself, and you end up being like the position that I was in the early 2000s, which was I wasn't acting like myself, right? I was acting like who I thought I was supposed to be, which was wrong, by the way. But the end result of that is anxiety and stress, right?
mm,
And I think a lot of people would do themselves a service is if they did some self-reflection. And that's what Marnie and I talk a lot about and understand, okay, what makes us tick? Because there are certainly different ways to lead. And you should lead based off of, your core values and not what somebody else thinks, you should do, if that makes sense.
mm. Yeah, well, there's a couple of things you said there, and something you said earlier that I'd like to follow up on. I mean, one of the things there about the authenticity of leadership, and I think a lot of people go into whether it's a leadership role or other roles that they're involved in, and think this is the way I have to be, yet this is me,
Yeah.
and so they kind of spend a lot of energy being that, whereas this doesn't require that much energy at all. And and so that leads to what you said, stress and so on, and I keep sort of saying, "Just be that,"
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's a lot easier. Yes, there are probably elements of that where you think maybe, there's an opportunity for growth here, which is the development stuff and what you mentioned there. Now, in terms of knowing yourself, you mentioned something earlier that both you and Marnie are really good problem solvers, and I've recently gone through an exercise of identifying my core strengths, which I'd never really sort of looked at um, self awareness or self analysis from that point of view of what are my core strengths, and then what are the areas where they don't belong to my core strengths at all. In fact,
Yeah.
they're kind of core weaknesses, if you like. They don't use that terminology, but it's those are areas, of course, where I can look at and say, well, actually, I'd like to be better at that, and so that's an opportunity for me to develop in that area. Um, Looking at the idea of core strengths and then core values, how do you integrate all that into kind of the self leadership
So it's funny you
philosophy?
bring up those two pieces because one of the first activities that we do in our book and walk people through is creating your own personal operating system, right? A set of instructions on how you operate. And those two pieces are really important, right? The core values are the how you do things and the strengths are the skills that you have to make those pieces happen. So it is important to know and those, if we won't call them weaknesses, we can call them opportunities for improvement or growth, I suppose, right? It's good to
Mm,
know that as well, especially as you work with others to know those pieces and then to share
mm,
them so that you can find folks that you don't want to surround yourselves by folks that are just like you. You want to find folks that
that's
complement
right.
you.
Yeah.
It's certainly why Nick and I work well together because like you need a diamond dog. That's what Ted Lasso would call them. You need that accountability buddy to hold you accountable, but also to push you and push your boundaries. So knowing your own core values and strengths and sharing them with others helps you communicate and find better ways to work together and collaborate. Nick, what is your take on that?
Oh, I 100% agree. I think the one thing that we also do in both our masterclass and our book is we have an assessment, right? That you walk through a number of questions and basically it predicts, to with pretty high probability, based on the feedback that we've gotten in all of our discussions and chats and feedback from our users, our readers. Um, you know, what you're really good at based on the assessment, right? And then like you both were talking about, what your opportunities for improvement are. And it's surprising a little bit that it's fairly consistent, right? There are certain personality types that, maybe, are really good at being direct and communicating with clarity, but really struggle at the same time with empathy, right? It's
Mm,
funny how much there's the yin and the yang to your strengths versus your areas for improvement. And one of the things that we think is important, we do this in the book, is okay, when you find those areas for improvement, those opportunities for improvement, here are resources that will help you grow in those
mhm.
areas. Because I think y'all would agree, right? It's not good enough just to identify those things. It's
Yeah.
coming up with an action plan to actually address them.
Mm. Well, we haven't actually talked about Ted Lasso yet. And for those of us that don't have access to the show because it's exclusive to Apple TV in Australia, and I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the world. But for those that have kind of perhaps only just seen trailers or
Lots of
something or
memes.
don't know what it's all
Yeah.
about, yeah, yeah. Um, Give us a very brief snapshot of what it is, and but more importantly, how it plays into what you've developed as a leadership philosophy and leadership
So
training
the
program.
quick bit of the story is Ted Lasso was an American football coach who went to England to coach football, which is soccer. So it's a fish out of
Mm,
water story. And he told the press on his first day, there's an entire internet of things I don't know about soccer. And yet we learned quickly that Ted does, however, know something about coaching and leading. So the fish out of water story, I'll go with that part and then let Nick tell you the other half of it. The fish out of water story very much aligned with our story because we started a company in an area where we didn't have any experience and background. So that's step one of the story. I'll let Nick take step two through whatever number
mm.
he wants.
Yeah. So, I mean, just long story short, in the same 3 seasons that Ted Lasso aired, like Marnie said, we started this software business. We scaled it from nothing, completely bootstrapped, and exited for multi-million dollars 3 years later. Um, and when we had sold it, we it was a software business. We didn't have a single salesperson, and we had tremendous growth. We were bombarded with questions. Okay, what was the key to success? And to us, we believed it was our framework, not only our leadership framework, but our business operating framework. And we wanted to find a way to communicate that. And um, where Ted Lasso comes into play is, for those in your audience who have seen the show, Ted is this, as Marnie said, he was a great coach. He was a great leader, but he was overly positive. He had so much empathy. His optimism was just contagious, and it was really counterculture to everything that's going on in the world today. And when I was watching the show, I was like, that is Marnie Stockman. She is the living representation of this fictional character. And we said, wouldn't it be a great way to present personal leadership and business concepts through a story that was relatable, and it wasn't the same old, you know, not that we don't get a lot of leadership books because we're leadership book junkies, right? But we wanted to do something different that anybody can relate to. It didn't matter if you're a CEO, or if you're a mom, if you're a dad, if you're a university student. We wanted to find kind of something that was really relatable. And I think a lot of people say, well, I haven't seen the show, is it going to be relatable to me? It is, because we kind of restate the stories. It might include some teasers if you ever watched the show, but we give you the context of what's coming. So, and it was a lot of fun. And to us, being successful, in anything we do requires an element of fun. And Marty and I had a lot of fun writing it.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. Is there? Can you share a kind of a story from the Ted Lasso series that encapsulates some of the important concepts and how it relates to leadership as
Well,
life?
I'll start with the
Or
leadership is life one, because they're one of our favorite characters, Danny Rojas, is an overly optimistic, positive soccer player, and every time he runs on the field, he is singing his name, Danny Rojas, and football is life. And he just is so passionate about this job, the work, the career that he has chosen, that it's hard to not smile when you hear it. And so we took sort of that energy and passion and said, leadership is life. If you really, again, and the subtitle of our book is A Leadership Book for Life, Your Life. We really wanted folks to see themselves as a leader for themselves, so that kind of ties that bit together. We have so many stories. I'm curious which one Nick's going to pick.
Well, Marty and I have a saying, design your vibe and build your tribe, right? Which is design what you are, your personal leadership framework, right? And then build your support network around you. In the show, Ted Lasso has his support network that he calls the Diamond Dogs, right? It's his group around him that holds him accountable, provides him advice, calls him out when he's not doing the right thing. And we talk about this in the book, the whole notion of, you can't do everything on your own. Yes, it's important that you be yourself, but you have to have a way to keep you in check, hold you accountable, make sure that you're progressing and you're working to become the best version of yourself. So we have a whole section in our book, in our master class, about support networks and community and building relationships. And we marry it to the concept in the show, which was hilarious, in how they presented this group of people that supported Ted as he worked to become more proficient in the UK, in England, as well as in the sport of soccer. So that is one example that we pull heavily from on the show, and
Mm,
it applies in real life.
Hmm. There's a there's a couple of other things I'd kind of like to explore. Coming back to something that you said earlier, Nick, which is, at some point in our corporate career, at some point we become so
Mm.
proficient at the thing that we do because we're experts at that particular skill that we're promoted into a leadership role for which we perhaps haven't been prepared. And um, and the the idea that we can kind of rely on others there if we recognize that, hey, we can be vulnerable here, we can ask for support, we can um, bring that on board. That sort of seems to relate really well to what you were saying about Ted surrounding himself with this. What was it?
Diamond
The
dogs.
Diamonds,
Diamond Dogs, yeah, yeah,
diamond
yeah,
dogs. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. I mean, I would not be here today if I did not have that support network back then because I was really struggling, and I think we talk to people all the time, and they find themselves in similar positions, small to medium-sized businesses. This happens constantly, right? That small to medium-sized
Mm,
businesses don't really have the budget to go out and bring in this experienced leader. So what do? They promote from within, based off of that, you know, the person who did the best at their
Yeah, we
job.
hear imposter
Um,
syndrome all the
so
time, right?
absolutely, yeah, and having those that end up being successful have some resources to lean on. And hopefully it's a mentor, right? Hopefully it's the person above them that's helping them get into it, or externally they've sought out a mentor. One of our goals with everything that we do is to be another resource for them to lean on. And if they don't know how to find a
mm,
mentor, we talk to, okay, this is how you build your network. These are certain approaches. By the way, something I'm not very good at, and that's why I have Marnie, because she has helped me in the last however many years kind of work to develop that.
mm. Yeah. The corollary of that also is that you don't necessarily need to know the nitty gritty of the business or in Ted Lasso's
Yeah,
case, the
yeah,
game he's coaching, uh, in order to be successful if you apply the right leadership principles and surround yourself with the right people. So not only the people, of course, that will help you develop your leadership skills, but then the experts in the. So I imagine he had somebody that coached the players on player strategy and skills and so on. He didn't do that because it
yeah.
wasn't his skill.
I can remember, when I was the math supervisor in our school system, and the assistant superintendent came up to me and said, "Okay, you can't have the mindset of if you want it done right, you're gonna do it yourself because that doesn't scale. So you have to find a way to
Mm,
delegate and to build trust so that you not only the team trusts you, but you trust the output of the team, right? So you're going to have to develop a communication system, which is another really important piece of that, so that you do build the trust. So that Ted Lasso trusted the folks that he had, right, to put in the right strategies and plays, et cetera.
mm. Yeah, well, talk to us a little bit about that communication because I know that's another big thing you talk about in the book and in all the documentation
Yeah,
I've seen
yeah.
from you.
So I mentioned earlier our personal operating system. One of the pieces that we talk about in the book is kind of creating your own communication guide, which is sort of a how do you work with me, Doc? We took that idea from Claire Hughes Johnson, who wrote. She was the, I believe, COO of Stripe, and she wrote the book Scaling People, and she found that folks struggled to understand her method of working with them, thinking she was micromanaging, et cetera, when in fact that was just the way she learned things and communicated. But when she finally outlined a system for, I'm going to meet with you this often, and these are the types of things I like to talk about on the phone. These are the types of ways to, text me, et cetera. Now, when you understand that about someone, it does make it much easier. We thought when we did our first hire in our company that we had communicated expectations and ways to work. And 6 months later, we figured out that I'd really missed on that. and we had to let that person go. But we started building our own communication guides for future hires and said, this is how we work. And then we expected them to make communication guides as well, which really smooths some of the angst. For example, I typically at 9 p.m. am in bed. So, like a panic text message at 10 p.m. Is going to make me insane and not productive. So, just knowing that solves a lot of problems right out of the gate. I don't get people texting me at 10 p.m. So we have folks think about the importance of knowing again how you like to be communicated with and then sharing that so other people can
Mm,
meet those expectations. Nick and I use the phrase all the time, what is inspected is what is expected. And that is also true for how to work with you.
mm. Yeah, that's a really important point, and I was sort of reflecting back on some of the issues that I'd experienced, particularly in my corporate days, and this comes back to when email first came about, and everybody, of course, got excited by email. But then, after a short period of time, it was clear that some people liked to use email and they liked that, and others absolutely abhorred it. And so, when those two people got together, there was usually a
Yeah.
big breakdown in communication. Well, because the people that liked the email kind of stopped using the phone to pick up the phone and talk to people, and wondered why so and so that they'd emailed hadn't responded at all, or why they weren't doing what they were being asked to
So,
do.
well, I have a 25-year-old and a 23-year-old. The 25-year-old's a phone talker. The 23-year-old is not. Will not call. Is a texter. So, like, even within, it's not even age based. I mean, those 2 years don't make a difference.
I mean,
Yeah,
but even to that point, I mean, going back to Marnie's example earlier about, creating the communication guide within our company, we had to set up rules, around, we're a small software company growing fast and, rapidly. And we had a lot of different fires we had to put out. And, from a communications standpoint, all right, this is when a phone call happens. This is when you might get a Slack message or instant message. This is sufficient for email. All right. And then this is just put it in our knowledge base. And setting up rules of engagement uh, ended up being very critical for us, as it does for almost every company I've been at. It's just some of those companies we've never really established those rules of engagement, which all of a sudden becomes, everything's a fire. Things are misinterpreted to your point earlier, and things could get not pretty fast. When communication goes bad, that to us is always one of the biggest indicator that we've got major problems ahead of us. Communication is critically important, obviously.
mm, yes, the endless communication chains that can happen when that's not clear as well, really kind of take people away from doing something productive, and often also lead to misunderstandings. Mm.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Um, Coming back to the leadership is life concept, I know we've talked quite a bit about business, but one of the things that you do point out is that we're all leaders in different parts, and even if we're kind of the person that sweeps the roads, although I don't think there's anybody that does that these days, it's all machines and so on. But even if it's somebody that does a manual job like that they think all I need is my broom and the job's done, we're still leaders in some parts of our life, aren't we? So talk to us a little bit about how does your philosophy apply to individuals that may not see themselves as leaders in their work role, but certainly should be leaders in
So we
parts
always
of their
say
life.
that your, leadership happens in a boardroom, in a locker room, in a classroom, and in your living room. And I think where we find we get a lot of interesting comments from both the masterclass and the book are from parents or from college age students maybe looking for their first job. Parents often, the interesting piece there is that's one of the most important leadership roles there is to parent a child, right? And they haven't thought of it necessarily as leadership. And it's
Yeah.
interesting when we talk about core values and then say, have you thought about how your 14, 16-year-old, what their core values are and why you're struggling in in those conversations, again, coming down to communication when they start thinking about, "Oh, right, I am command and control." Nagging is command and control leadership, right? So, oh, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, thinking through those elements, is one way, and then I'll let Nick talk about, like, what we see with folks that are either struggling at work or struggling to find a job and kinda how we see the leadership role for them.
Yeah, and I think it goes to defining what personal leadership is. It's again, it's not it's different than organizational leadership. Personal leadership is really truly understanding yourself, what makes you tick. It's setting goals, it's how you communicate, it's how you build a support network around you. And I don't care what you do. You do not have to lead other people to excel at all those things. And if you could excel at all those things, life is a lot easier. We talked about we're almost in 2025. And I'm not sure, Jurgen, if you're familiar with Adam Grant and some of the books that
Mm.
that he wrote, but I think it's his most recent book, Hidden Potential. He talks about the fact that, yeah, we're in 2024 or 2023, whenever he wrote the book. But contrary to what many people think, yes, we're in this digital age, but we're in the midst of a character revolution.
Mm.
And what he's saying there is that with all this access to artificial intelligence and technology automation, you know, the 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 field is getting leveled. Skills themselves are becoming commoditized to some extent. And what's going to differentiate any individual and make them stand out is their character skills. That is what's going to allow you to set yourself apart from the crowd. And I think, and I think Marnie believes this as well, is we've kind of lost that a little bit, especially with the pandemic of a couple of years ago. I think we've had the reverse going on. People have gotten more inside. They've
Mm.
focused less on the softer skills, the character skills, which we would call personal leadership. And it's our belief, and Marnie mentioned she has two 20-something-year-olds, and I have a 20-year-old son as well. Uh, you know, the how you differentiate yourself and take yourself to that next level. We're all about leveling up. It's a focus on y- leading yourself, how to use emotional intelligence, how to build your network, how to build relationships. Because otherwise you're just going to get lost into this sea of everybody knows how to do X, Y, and Z because they have access to a training course online, or they can just have artificial intelligence do the
Yeah.
job for you. Let's differentiate yourself, bring some character, bring some personality, bring some authenticity and everything that goes along with it to the table. And that is really what Marnie and I are focusing on, which is trying to bring that to the forefront to because we believe it's kind of the cheat code to life, especially in 2024.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and um, I'm fascinated. I mean, I'm a techno geek of the highest order, and I've been from the early days of when was it, 2023, when ChatGPT
Yeah.
launched. I've been absolutely fascinated and blown away, and I continue to be blown away whenever I use it, and I basically use it every day. Uh, but at the same time, I do see the danger of kind of losing the human touch and losing those character strengths that you mentioned, or putting them aside. The and this was something that I was always very passionate about in the days of email automation, and when people would send mass emails out as part of their marketing program, and they'd be very impersonal and um, I know I'd get the same email as you would get, even though our interests might be completely different, and we might be focused on completely different product areas within the spectrum of what was on offer, and yet we'd get the same email with the same promotion because that was what the company was promoting right now, and it was all automated, so there was nothing personal there, and there was no relationship, that touch point that was there. And I was always very strong on, let's go back to that relationship bit. And of course, AI, um, the danger there is that we start to lose even more of that. And yet I see AI as, because it's actually everything that somebody's put on the internet
Yeah.
somewhere, just collected and collated and brought back to respond to whatever's been prompted. And so I see a huge opportunity there for actually using it together with that personal character trait and strengths. I don't know whether you want to comment on that.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think, I think that I'm a data geek, right? I've been in data
Mm,
warehousing, business intelligence, for years and years and years, analytics, and I think about my son who's now, you know, about to graduate from university, uh, following the same path, and then my message to him is, and he leans on ChatGPT all the time, right? You don't need to know all the bells and whistles of Microsoft Excel and pivot tables and all the
mm,
Tableau, all these analytics tools. You just need to have a base level understanding of the skills, right? You lean on the technologies when you need to enhance your skill level on an on-demand basis. But then at the same time, just as we've been talking about, where you excel and where you stand out, where you differentiate is how you interact with other people. And that's the focus that, at least, what Marty and I believe in the United States, schools aren't focusing on. They're focusing more on the hard skills, the core skills of math, reading, technology. But to us, that's less and less important because you don't have to just know those just by thinking about them from memory or learning
mm.
them. You have this access to the internet, which
Yeah.
could give you that, as long as you have that base level of understanding, it can get you the answer that you need at some point.
Mm. Yeah. At some point, it comes back to this idea of problem solving. And I see, I mean, I go back to my school days, which is a long time ago, but I guess things haven't all changed all that much in that time. I remember having to rote learn stuff, and I struggled with memorizing things. And if I if I like, where I excelled was in the subjects where I understood the
Hmm.
concepts, I understood the connections, and then I found that I only had to memorize
A bit of a
kind of a
framework.
bit of a framework because everything else fitted
Yeah.
together logically for me. Whereas where I didn't have that understanding, then I had to rote memorize everything. I had to memorize all the detail. And I always thought, even as a relatively young child, thought, what good's this for me in the future? Yes, it trains my memory, but that's
Well, you
about
can
it.
imagine as a math teacher how many
Yeah.
times I heard, "Well, like, I can always do that on a calculator." And, at the time it was, "Well, what are you gonna do, carry a calculator around with you all the time?" Yeah, and a phone, I mean, and a
Yeah.
camera and, like, every other thing, right? So, there's gotta be some other use to
Yeah.
it for sure.
Well, I'm not
Okay,
it's
but
on the
yeah,
charger right now, but
literally on your
smartwatch,
hand,
right?
yeah,
It's all there.
yeah, so
Yeah,
accessible. In
yeah.
addition to the framework, I think the other piece, because I was so the math area was always easy for me. I could memorize or learn the concept fine. It was the history bit that story is so
Mm,
important. I would just memorize facts, facts, facts,
mm,
like, and then literally when I was done a test, I would walk out and I could barely tell you my name because I just dumped everything that was in my brain on a piece of paper and couldn't remember any of it. But when folks got better at storytelling, it was easier for me to remember the concepts that
mm,
came behind it, which kind of ties back to what you asked us at the beginning, like why write a book with Ted Lasso in it? Because it tells a story that helps you understand the concept. So I think storytelling and frameworks are really important for folks. Um, yeah, to connect the dots for themselves.
yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one because you've reminded me, um, and I can't even remember what I did to deserve this, but I know when I was a very young child, and my parents bought encyclopedias, and when I was a very young child, I must have got up to some mischief, and as a penalty, um, my parents told me I had to sit down and read in the encyclopedia, and somehow, and I don't know whether they said this or whether that was what I chose, but I read a lot of the old Greek and Roman mythologies, and they
Yeah.
absolutely fascinated me. I was
You're
actually
good.
totally totally captivated by this stuff. It
Yeah.
wasn't a penalty at all. But and yeah, what I miss though, and like I reflect back on this now, is putting those stories into a context that how do they apply to, what are the lessons that I can take out of those for today's life, for my personal life or for today's kind of environment. And those are the things that taking something and putting into a context that has a practical application for people where I think we're still missing a whole lot.
I mean, I think you nailed it. We are missing that a whole lot. I know, um, Marnie worked with my son, in pursuit of him getting an internship and, going through the interview process. Marnie, you can tell this story about how you told him to respond
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
stories and what an
Yeah. It's
impact that made.
interesting because, if you ask folks, typically first question in an interview is tell me a bit about your background, and they start with like somewhere
Yep.
between well in kindergarten or like 4 years ago. All right, well, I've got all of these facts in front of me, and so we took
Mm.
a look, and he was very good at this. I don't know how helpful I was other than pointing it out to him, but he was very good at looking at all the facts about him, from extracurricular activities to the business fraternity that he's in, to the job that he has, to the courses that he's taken, to success, lots of places. And he was able to pick up the themes that told a story about who he was and the way he is. And it's interesting because he, of course, knows that we have written the book and has read Lead It Like Lasso. So he talks about like, oh,
Mm.
I get it, right? My core values actually tie into all of these pieces. The way I do anything is the way I do everything. And it's interesting because he just applied for an internship, which he has just recently actually has got he accepted the position that they offered him. But he interviews really well because he has learned to tell the story instead of just state facts, have it mean something and connect it to what the person you said it at the very beginning, right? How can you make it about the person that you're talking with or listening to? So when he could
Yes.
help the interviewer see how his story could play into their story, that makes the connection for folks, which is so much more powerful.
Mm. Yeah, which is a core leadership principle, isn't it? Because if we're talking leadership, and let's say as a leader of a group of people, I'm wanting to go in a certain direction and wanting everybody to buy into that. If I can tell a story in exactly that way and get people to buy in like that, then it's much more powerful.
Definitely.
Mm. All right. Well, this is fascinating. I'm just seeing my little
Oh,
timer thing go red. So we could go on
for
talking
sure.
leadership for ages, and we haven't really explored some of the other stories from Ted Lasso, but we'll leave some for the people to read the book or go watch the series if they
Yeah.
have access to
So, the trial,
Apple
you can
TV
totally
here.
binge watch it in a weekend. I mean, it'll be a long weekend, maybe take the full week.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, I think it's a good point to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions I ask of every guest, and we'll get double the answers today for ideally to inspire the listener to go and do something awesome as a result, maybe some kind of innovative leadership insight. So
Okay.
you all set?
Ready to go?
All right. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Brainstorm.
Embrace curiosity. Ask why not in addition to just why.
Yeah, I love that. And of course, that can work as a brainstorming tool, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other ones I like question is what if? Um,
Yeah.
I
Love
hope
it.
that's not a rapid
Love it.
fire, one of the 5 rapid fire
Absolutely.
questions. That's a long one to answer.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it has
Yes.
to be in context.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. What's the best thing you've done to develop new
I
ideas?
partner with Nick.
And,
Let's put
we've
you
been
on the
fortunate
spot, Nick.
enough to develop new ideas, new products. I think two most important things are, number one, you gotta have passion for it. And number two, you gotta be open to different and diverse perspectives,
Mm,
and take those in for sure.
yeah. And the other thing you didn't mention there, but you mentioned earlier, is bringing fun into the work you do, and I can tell by just the way both of you are appearing here today and your interactions that you obviously have fun working together, and passion brings that
Yeah.
fun as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
I thought you said there were no wrong answers to this, Jürgen. Now I feel like I put a wrong answer. I'm 0 for 2.
Yeah. All right. Well, what's the favorite resource you use most often?
I know Marty's gonna say
Oh,
Notion. That's
and Nick wishes I would say Notion. So, I mean, I'm great with Google and ChatGPT. That's a good solid resource these days.
I mean, we
Mm,
literally use ChatGPT
Yeah.
all the time to scenario plan, to put ourselves in different perspectives. We use it when we're mentoring people, right? When they're saying, "Hey, I really have this new job that I want to get promoted for in this industry that we've never heard of." We'll go and we'll say, "Okay, Tim, like you are a assembly line engineer, right? Which we know nothing about.
mm,
What questions would you ask this person?" And then based on that, we can kind of, since we know the person, counsel them on how we think we might should respond. But I do think it's important to note that ChatGPT is not the be all end all,
Yeah,
and
you
it's not
can't
always
copy
the right
paste.
answer.
It's
I
it's
think,
a good
yeah. Yeah.
brain starter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I I often go back and say, I just put down, "Are you sure?"
yeah,
And it is
It
surprising how
apologizes.
often it says
yeah,
it does. It apologizes and says, "I'm
Yeah.
sorry for my
Yeah.
oversight. You're correct.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
overlooked
Like the
something."
entire last 4 pages of stuff I had read to you. Yeah. Thank you.
yeah. Marty's actually at the point where when chat gives a response that she likes, she
I
gives it
do.
bonus points. She'll say 3
Yeah.
bonus
I'll say
points for
I was
you.
a teacher.
We've yet to see the benefit from
I feel
that,
like
but
I'm
yeah,
training it
I
on
think it's
like I like
Yeah.
hilarious.
responses
But
like this, and I thought instead of
yeah,
saying it that way, I'm like, I'm just
yeah,
gonna give it points. That's what I do to humans. If you say something I love, points.
yeah. I think I believe that that is really
Thank
valuable
you.
to do that, because I think every input that
Yeah.
it gets, it learns from.
Yeah.
So if we're and I keep telling people,
Yes.
be kind to it.
Yeah.
So I say thank
Oh
you
yeah.
at the end of conversations that I have, and it often responds with, "You're welcome. If
Yeah.
there's anything else I can do for you, let me know." But I think that's just I'm just training it to
Oh.
be kinder.
Yeah.
And one time this blew me away. One time I went back and I had a strategy session, and I was pulling together a strategy document, and I fed it all the information. I said, "Can you kind of," it was all over the shop because I'd sort of just brain dumped stuff all over the place. And I thought, I've got really good information here, but it's all over the shop, and it's sort of hard to present to somebody. So I gave it all the information. I said, "Can you sort of put this into a coherent package and make stuff?" And it did all that. And then we went backwards and forwards, and it was probably an hour or 2 hour session. But at the end of that, I had this fabulous strategy document with everything that I put in, plus a few things that it suggested that I hadn't thought of that I then incorporated. And at the end of it, I was so pumped that I said, "Thank you for all of that. I really appreciate you." And you know how
What?
it responded?
Well,
It said the traditional, "You're welcome. If there's anything else you need, please reach out." And "Thank you for your appreciation. Not many people do that."
oh.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
thought, man.
Wow.
Yeah, you
Bonus
bonus
points.
points for you,
Yeah.
Jurgen. I mean, you
I'll
got it
give
to
you two,
respond with
which my
that. That's
chat can tell
fantastic.
you is more than I often give. It one time got 3 points, and I had to tell it, just so you know. Like,
Yeah.
these points come few and far between. You should be very excited when you get these points. That means you had an outstanding response.
Yeah, yeah, it's, but again, it's, um, I always remind people when they talk and when I have this conversation around the humanity of it, I always remind people that, hey, this is information that people have put
Yeah,
somewhere, and all the artificial intelligence is doing
quickly.
is finding it and
Yeah,
putting it together somehow.
Which is another great reason not to trust everything that it says,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
Because
Yeah, exactly,
yeah,
because there's a lot of
yeah. They're
misinformation on
reading
the
that high
internet
school paper you wrote and
for
posted
sure.
somewhere.
Excellent. All right. Well, what's the best way to keep a client on track when you're working
Constant
with them?
communication and understanding their goal and the path to get there.
Hmm.
I mean, Marnie and I are the same people. Yeah, it's all about clarity and shared ownership, and yeah, communication is the key from our perspective.
Yeah, and communication in the way they prefer to
Correct.
be communicated to,
And
right?
don't text them at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, finally, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate
Oh, yeah, do
themselves?
interesting things and talk about it. I stole that from Adam Grant
Yeah,
for the
I mean,
record, but I had a quick answer.
yeah,
Okay, yeah, I have heard that answer before. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was Adam Grant. Yeah.
well, he
Oh,
really got it
yeah.
from
Oh, we'll
Marnie,
say
so
that.
yeah, we'll I said it before, the number one thing you do is lead yourself, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
It's what differentiates you. It's if you because you're never done leading yourself, right? If you continue to build and build and build and build, eventually it's going to differentiate you, and you never
I
know
think
what
that
that's
is
going to be.
because you're working from a place where you're passionate about, right? We spoke to Bob Berg, who says the goal in life is to be happy. And happy is that you are living according to your core values and delivering value to the world that way, which I think is exactly what Nick said. That is leading yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Is that
Yes.
the Go Giver,
Yeah.
Bob? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
He's a very
fantastic.
good
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for getting us through the buzz round. Now, where can people find out more about Lead It Like Lasso, about both of you and the work you do, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you shared
So
with
the
us
easiest
today?
place to get all of that is to go to leaditlikelasso.com. Our LinkedIn profiles are attached to that. So that's the easiest way to connect with us, individually that way. And the book can be found on Amazon, or we link from the website, and our master classes on there as well. So that's a good way for all the things.
And our
Oh
social
yeah,
handles are there
we're
as well.
we're
If you want to
Lead It
find us
Like
on
Lasso
Facebook,
everywhere.
Instagram,
So yeah.
TikTok.
Excellent. All right. And we will, of course, include links in the show notes as well for people to click straight through. So if you're driving while you're listening to
Yes,
this,
don't
no need to worry.
yes,
It's
do not
all
type
there
this
in the show
now.
notes. Yeah. Okay. Well, finally, Nick and Marnie, what action would you like our listener to take from our
Well,
conversation
I
today?
think if they thought a little bit more about what their core values are, and if they're living according to them, that would be good.
And I think that, of course, we're going to say the same thing, but I think self-reflection is a big deal, right? And, if you can take that one little step to know yourself better, small actions done consistently, they can lead to extraordinary outcomes. We have this saying, that, you know, um, we have a Venn diagram that says, people who can become extraordinary,
People who ever
and then people who already are. So
Mm,
it's all about consistency and just advancing the ball, taking small steps every day. And that's what we
mm.
believe.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of James Clear's work, Atomic
whoa,
Habits, and just, yeah,
think that's
little
behind me on
steps.
my shelf.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm curious. How do you guys do self reflection?
Well, I think on a daily basis, we ask, what does success look like? And so that's sort of as a pair. But then, I mean, I always personally beat myself up rethinking things if but that's not always what we mean. But I think thinking about, what the future, what we'd like to leave behind in the book, we talk about, if you think about your legacy and what you want to be able to say you've done, to think about that regularly and then what are we doing to get there?
And we actually put that in our book. We put what we believe our legacy to be, or what we want our legacy to be, and we do status checks on that, you know,
Daily? Yeah.
constantly, and we understand exactly. We assess where we're at, um, where we need to go, where we're going off course. And, individually, personally speaking, I do very similar things in my personal life, right? In terms of that's our corporate, that our legacy, we talk about it from a business perspective. Um, but understanding, we have exercises where you write your retirement letter or your obituary, right? I know that's doom and gloom,
Mm.
but it's a measuring stick. And
Yep.
if you think about that, you think about the plan to get there. Um, you know, you have to self reflect to see if you're on course or not. And then,
Mm.
of course, surround yourself with diamond dogs, as we talked about earlier. That's how we
Yeah.
hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah, it's fascinating. A lot of people talk about journaling, and I still struggle with journaling, but I do self reflection in different ways. So I'm always curious how people do that are
Oh,
really
I
strong about
wish
it.
I
Mm.
get a good solid 3 days in and then
On the
yeah.
journaling side, we're more of the Gantt
Yes.
project type of people, right? Where
Yeah.
we clearly define our objectives and where we're going and how we're going
Yes.
to perform
That.
against those objectives.
Mm.
Much less journaling. We're not necessarily journaling people. Although journaling is great.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get us wrong, but it's
Yeah.
not us.
All right. Well, this has been fabulous. I've really
Same.
enjoyed our conversation, Marnie and Nick.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
having
coming on
us.
the show. It's been fun to have both of you on together and talking about leadership in all aspects and a few stories from Lead It Like Lasso, the book. And yeah, all the best for the future.
Yeah,
And please
thank
do
you.
stay in touch.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much for having us. We had a great time.